The Zeiss 50mm f2. What can't it do? Stop down to f1.4. This particular flavor that I'm going to talk about is the ZM version. This lens is bloody awesome. It's not a lens that's talked about in a whole lot of videos. You can't find, they're mostly in written form. This is a lens from 2004. You'll find people on forums championing it more than you will on YouTube, for example. It's pretty funny that in the Leica world, a $700 to $800 lens, that's how much I paid for this used, is considered a budget option. From my other main system, Fuji, a budget option is more $200 to $300 lens, maybe even less than that. But this lens certainly isn't a rip-off, and when you start using it, it becomes readily apparent why it is worth that. So why this 50mm? There's countless options. It's M-mount after all. It's been around for 70 years or so. This lens is what you'd call a modern optic. It's sharp. It doesn't have a whole lot of what you'd call vintage characteristics. Those sorts of characteristics that you might find in more budget options or the much older variety of lenses. This is a great lens to take anywhere and everywhere, really. 50mm is great walk around sort of option, everyday photos. It's great for everything except after dark, but that's maybe more of a rangefinder issue because there's no IBIS. If you adapted this to something else, it would be much more usable there at night. Even though it's only f2, it can still create some lovely separation like you can see in the photos. This is also my first time using a 50mm on a full frame camera, and I was pretty ecstatic and happy with the amount of background separation I was able to achieve. I'll do a side-by-side comparison with the 35mm f1.4 on the Fuji mount. Something that I found maybe sort of annoying, but that's more of a system issue than this lens. Since it isn't a Leica lens, there's no profile on the camera, so it won't get automatically loaded in. Like when you go into Lightroom, if you have a native lens and autofocus one, it will automatically apply that profile to correct any vignette or known chromatic aberration issues or distortion. This lens doesn't really have any issues that need correcting. I've never had to adjust any distortion or vignette, which is pretty awesome. The only real issue is that if you don't have any Leica lenses, that you have to go and manually change those profiles so that you know which lens you took the photos on afterwards. So sometimes I've accidentally left the profile on a 35mm lens that I was using when I was using this, and I just had to go by memory. So a few years later down the track, that might be a bit of an issue because you're probably not going to remember that you shot it on the 50 instead of the 35. What's it like to use this lens? It's pretty nice, pretty nice. Built like a tank, feels very solid, not overly heavy. The aperture ring is perfect on this camera. It has click stops every third of an f-stop. The clicks are very satisfying and smooth. They take a little bit of force so you're not going to accidentally knock it and change your aperture. The focus mechanism feels pretty nice too. It is just using a nub, unlike a lot of other lenses which might go for a tab. So it's a little bit harder to one-hand this. It's still possible. It's got really nice grooves on it. And the nub is big enough to catch on your finger, but it's still not quite as nice. And that's more of a subjective thing though. You can still use the nub on this to do things like zone focusing that you can do with a tab. It's probably not quite as good as a tab, but it still gives you that option to use the muscle memory for zone focusing. One gripe I do have is with the lens cap. It fits on nice and snugly, but it can be kind of difficult to get it perfectly like that. I don't really know why. I don't really have this issue with other lenses. Maybe they've designed it to be too snug to the point where if you don't put it on exactly perfectly, it doesn't quite sit right and then it can dislodge. When it's on, it's really on though, but oftentimes I don't put it on quite right. What is it like to use this lens? It's really nice. I took this on my Leica M10 as my only lens for that system to Japan. I probably went into that trip being more of a 35 to 40mm kind of guy, but by the end of it I was really enjoying using the 50mm, getting that little bit of separation, don't have to get too close to people. 50mm is kind of underrated for landscapes as well. It really gets you closer because you can be so far away from them sometimes. This lens isn't really going to weigh you down too much either. It's only 230 grams. It's pretty compact in size. It's pretty comparable in size to a Fuji 23mm f2 if you've used that lens. and that one's only 50 grams lighter, and this is an all metal build. That one has autofocus, so there's always going to be trade-offs. But in terms of calibration, when I got this, it was calibrated perfectly. I've never had any issues with the rangefinder itself. I've been able to use this lens while hiking, traveling, street photography, everything. It's never really managed to disappoint me. Given the modern optics, I'd say it's an excellent lens to just be an everyday lens. It's 50mm might be a little bit too tight for some people, but you can really adapt and get used to that sort of thing. It's perfectly sharp. This is a do-it-all kind of lens. A lot of other people would buy a lens like this and then they'd buy something with a bit more character as a special use case type of lens to get some glow or special flares. But this is just great to use for everything. Sunstars were an unexpected delight on this camera. I had no idea what to expect. I didn't see them in any of the videos or reviews that I saw, but one of the first days that I took it out, was shooting through some trees, got some amazing Sunstars at like f4, f5.6. It was crazy. They look really nice, but also for a lens like this, you have to consider that you're still using the rangefinder system. So even at f2, this can still be kind of hard to nail perfect focus or critical focus. If you get down to 1.4, then it's going to get even harder. You're going to start needing something like a VisorFlex or using peaking, and then you're really slowing yourself down on some of the older cameras. The biggest limitation I have found is the minimum focus distance. Usually in a lens review, people will just rattle off the minimum focus distance and it kind of just flies right by me. Don't really care. With a rangefinder, if you're somewhat familiar with this system, then 70 centimeters is pretty standard, because that's the limit of how close the rangefinder system can actually focus. So most lenses, apart from some newer ones, will only focus down 2.7 meters. And using this lens as an everyday lens, that can become a bit of an issue. Restaurants, cafes, even at your own home, taking photos of people fairly close or of your food. I've had to do a pretty awkward shuffle back and leaning really far back on my chair to be able to take photos with this lens. So that's what I would say is probably the biggest downside, which in the grand scheme of things is not really the end of the world, but it has sometimes made me think about getting a lens that can focus down a little bit closer, like those new Typox Samaras. There's a 50mm 1.4 for that focuses down to 0.45 meters, and the new Summilux that costs like $10,000 or something has the same focusing abilities. Obviously I don't have the money for that. Chromatic aberration for this lens is probably what I would say is on par for the course. If you're in a really high contrast environment shooting at f2, you're going to see some fringing. That's basically inevitable with most lenses, unless you're getting those apochromatic lenses from Voigtlander or Leica, or you're coming from a $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 Sony G Master lens like that. But especially when you consider how small this package is, there's always going to be some chromatic aberration, but it's never popped up so much that it's really annoyed me. So I wouldn't consider it a particularly big deal. You might look up this lens and see that it's 1,500 Australian, brand new, and I wouldn't pay that much for this lens. At that point, you can pretty much get a decent deal or pay a little bit more and get a used Cimmicron 50mm. And then at that point, you probably have a pretty accurate profile, which could be handy, and you also get the Leica look, or you can be one of those people that is dead set that you have to put a Leica lens on your Leica body. But since this lens has been around for, I think 20 years, yeah, 2004, you can get some really good deals on this lens. I got this for basically half the price that it retails for new. I got it for, I think, $750 or $800 Australian. And I say that's a bargain compared to some of the $2,000, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000 Summicrons that you can get from Leica. And this is just an excellent all-around lens. And it's also, they've been making it for the last 20 years, so you can get one that was made 20 years ago, you can get one that was made 10 years ago, but it's in that really sweet spot of made in the last 20 years. It hasn't been sitting around for too long. You're probably not going to be finding ones that have a lot of fungus or dust buildup inside. This is in the sweet spot where it's a really good lens and it's a really good price for people who are getting their first 50mm for a rangefinder. So a lot of people, like me, they buy their first Leica. I bought a Leica M10, people might be buying an M240, M11, and they find that they have no money left over to buy a Leica branded lens, so they think, and then they find that they have no money to buy a Leica branded lens, so they try to find the next best option. Zeiss is a pretty household name in the land of photography, so mine was basically brand new condition. I can't find a single blemish with it. Just in general, you should get this lens. It's really good. It's a joy to use, it's really well priced, and usually you would have to pay a premium to get a name brand like Zeiss, but not in this case. It's a great lens.